He's
"Be
so
quiet,
cold.
cowboy, you're
I have to get him
freezing.
inside.
Tonight you'll sleep between us," said the Apache
Is he gonna
sisters.
make it?
The snow had come early this year, covering the desert with a thick, white blanket that made the world look quiet and still. The stars above were bright, but the air was harsh, and the wind cut through his coat like tiny knives. He had been riding for hours, hoping to reach a small town before nightfall, but the landscape had betrayed him. There were no towns nearby, no shelters, just miles of open land covered in snow, and his horse was slow and tired. He hugged his coat tighter around himself, trying to hold in the warmth that seemed to slip away with every gust of wind. His boots crunched on the frozen ground, each step heavier than the last. He had faced storms before, harsh winds and nights where he had barely survived, but this cold was different. It seemed endless, and with every step he could feel the frost creeping into his fingers and toes. As he walked, he noticed a small plume of smoke in the distance. His heart jumped with hope. Perhaps it was a cabin or someone's house, somewhere warm, somewhere safe. The thought of rest, of a fire and food, gave him strength to keep moving, even when his legs felt frozen and stiff. The smoke wavered in the cold air, but it was real, and that was enough to guide him. The closer he got, the clearer it became that it was not a large house but a small, humble home, made of wood and stone. Despite its simplicity, it looked inviting, with a warm glow flickering through the windows. He approached slowly, unsure if he would be welcomed. Travelers in these parts were often treated with caution, especially strangers who appeared suddenly in the middle of winter. But the cold had made him desperate, and he had no other choice. He knocked lightly on the door, his hands shaking, partly from the cold, partly from hope. A moment later the door opened, and two young women appeared. They were sisters, and they looked surprised to see him. Their dark hair framed faces that were strong but kind, and their eyes were curious but not unkind. They looked at him carefully, noticing his frozen boots, his reddened cheeks, and the way he shivered uncontrollably. "Who are you?" the older sister asked, her voice calm but cautious. "It's dangerous out there tonight." The cowboy straightened as best he could, though the cold made it difficult to move properly. "Just a traveler," he said, his voice hoarse from the wind. I didn't expect to find anyone here. I was looking for shelter. Please, I'm freezing." The younger sister stepped forward, her eyes softening. "You look like you've been through a storm," she said. "Come in. You can't stay out there like that." Hesitant but relieved, the cowboy followed them inside. The warmth hit him like a wave, and he breathed in the smell of wood smoke and herbs. It was unlike anything he had smelled before, homey and comforting, a stark contrast to the cold, empty desert outside. He felt his stiff fingers start to regain some feeling as he removed his gloves and coat. The sisters moved around the small home with grace and efficiency. One started tending to the fire, while the other quickly brought blankets and a cup of warm tea. They worked in silence for a moment, letting him adjust, but their presence was comforting. The cowboy sank into a chair, still shivering slightly, and sipped the tea. It was sweet and soothing, and warmth began to spread through his chest. "You must be freezing," the older sister said gently, noticing his still shaking hands. "You should take off those wet clothes. You'll catch a chill worse than the snow." I can manage," the cowboy said, though his voice betrayed him. He knew she was right, but he was embarrassed to admit how vulnerable he felt. He had always been a man who relied on himself, who didn't ask for help, but tonight he had no choice. The younger sister smiled at him knowingly. "We don't mind," she said softly. "You're safe here. We'll make sure you're warm." For a moment the cowboy looked at the two women. They were so different from anyone he had ever met, strong, confident, and yet gentle in a way that made him want to trust them instantly. He nodded quietly, appreciating the offer. Words were not enough to express his gratitude, but the warmth of the fire, the tea, and their presence said it all. The sisters moved closer to the fire with blankets in their hands. One of them handed him an extra shawl, draping it over his shoulders. "There," she said, "that should help. You look like you've been out in the cold for days." The cowboy allowed himself a small smile, feeling a rare sense of relief. It had been years since he had felt cared for by strangers, and the simple acts of kindness felt overwhelming. He realized how exhausted he was, not just physically but in every other way. The harsh life of the range, the endless travel, the loneliness, it all caught up with him tonight. The sisters glanced at each other, silently communicating something unspoken. The younger sister then said, with a gentle teasing tone, "Be quiet, cowboy, you're freezing. Tonight you'll sleep between us." The cowboy blinked, surprised by the boldness of her words, but the warmth in her voice made him understand it was an invitation of care, not anything else. He chuckled softly, embarrassed, but also deeply grateful. He had never experienced such hospitality, and the simple gesture filled him with hope. They showed him to a small, cozy room with a bed that looked inviting. The sisters had laid extra blankets and pillows, making sure he would be warm through the night. The cowboy felt a strange mix of relief and humility. He had always been independent, proud of handling everything on his own, but tonight he realized there was no shame in accepting kindness. As he lay down, the fire's warmth seeped into the room, and he could hear the soft laughter and quiet conversation of the sisters in the next room. It was comforting, a reminder that even in the coldest, harshest places, there were people who cared. He closed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion of the day melt away, and let the warmth of the room, the fire, and the sisters' care wrap around him like a blanket. Outside, the snow continued to fall silently, but inside, there was a sense of safety and connection. The cowboy realized that sometimes, life brought people together in unexpected ways, and tonight, he had found a rare gift, warmth, compassion, and human kindness in a world that often seemed unforgiving. He drifted off to sleep, grateful for the sisters, for their courage to open their home to a stranger, and for the warmth that reminded him there was more to life than endless travel and survival. Tonight he would rest, not alone, but between the care of two remarkable sisters, and for the first time in a long time he felt at peace. The next morning, the cowboy woke slowly, still wrapped in the warmth of the blankets the sisters had prepared. The cold outside had not lessened, but inside the small home, the fire crackled cheerfully, filling the room with light and a soft sense of comfort. He stretched his arms and legs, feeling muscles sore from yesterday's long ride, but the warmth seeped into his bones, making him feel alive again. He could hear soft footsteps outside the room and the faint murmur of conversation. The sisters were already awake, moving about the small home with ease and purpose. The younger one carried a basket of food, carefully arranging it on the small wooden table near the fire. There was bread, some cheese, and a small pot of porridge that smelled sweet and earthy. The older sister was tending to the fire, adding logs and watching the flames dance. "Good morning," the cowboy said, his voice a little rough from sleep. "Good morning," the older sister replied, smiling gently. "You slept well." I did, thanks to you both," he said, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "I don't think I've ever slept this well outdoors before. I felt safe." The younger sister laughed softly. "You looked exhausted when you arrived. We thought you could use a proper night's rest." He nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. These women, strangers just yesterday, had taken him in without hesitation, cared for him, and now treated him like someone they knew and trusted. The idea was strange to him. In his life, most people were cautious or suspicious of travelers like him, but these sisters, there was no fear in their eyes, only kindness and quiet confidence. As he ate the simple breakfast, the cowboy found himself observing them. There was a rhythm to their movements, a calm efficiency that spoke of experience and resilience. They worked together without needing to speak much, yet their gestures and glances carried meaning. He wondered what life had taught them, what hardships they had faced to become so capable and so generous at the same time. Once the food was finished, the sisters encouraged him to sit by the fire and warm up. They poured him more tea, and the cowboy sipped it slowly, letting the liquid ease the chill from his chest and arms. He felt embarrassed at how fragile he had been last night, how completely dependent he had felt on their care. Yet at the same time he felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of comfort, a rare feeling of being looked after without judgment. The older sister finally spoke, breaking the quiet. "You must be tired from the ride. Where were you coming from, if you don't mind me asking?" The cowboy paused, thinking carefully. He wasn't used to talking about his journey with strangers, but these two seemed different. They weren't prying. There was no judgment in their voices. He finally answered, "I was traveling to a small town farther south, but the snow caught me by surprise and I lost my way. My horse was slowing down and I couldn't go any further. I didn't expect to find anyone here." The younger sister nodded, her dark eyes thoughtful. "The winter is harsh this year. Many travelers have had trouble. You were lucky to find us." He managed a small smile. "I was very lucky." For a while they sat in comfortable silence, letting the fire warm them. Outside, the wind howled across the snowy plains, but inside, the three of them felt safe. The cowboy noticed little things, the way the sisters moved, the way they shared glances, their quiet laughter, and he realized there was a deep bond between them, a connection he could sense but not fully understand. Then the younger sister spoke again, her voice soft but teasing. "Last night you were very quiet, almost like a statue, but you must admit you were shivering like a leaf." The cowboy chuckled, feeling his cheeks warm from embarrassment. "Yes, I suppose I was. I didn't mean to be so helpless." "You were very brave to come here alone," the older sister said. "It would have been easy to stay outside to try to make it through the night, but you didn't give up. That's bravery too." The cowboy looked at them, surprised by the kindness in their words. He had always thought bravery was facing danger head-on, without help, without relying on anyone. But these sisters had shown him that there was strength in accepting care, in trusting others, in being honest about one's limits. It was a lesson he hadn't expected to learn from strangers in the cold desert. As the morning progressed, the sisters suggested he freshen up. They had a small basin of water, warmed over the fire, and the cowboy carefully cleaned his face and hands. It felt good to wash off the grime and sweat of the ride, to feel clean again. The sisters moved quietly around him, preparing clothes to dry near the fire. There was no awkwardness, no sense of intrusion, only a natural, comforting rhythm to their actions. Once he was ready, the three of them sat together again. The sisters asked him about his life on the range, and he began to tell them stories of the long days, the wide-open plains, and the challenges of tending cattle in a land where nature was both beautiful and unforgiving. They listened with fascination, asking questions that showed genuine interest. In return, the sisters shared stories of their own lives, about growing up in the village, about learning the ways of the land from their parents and elders, about the traditions that had been passed down through generations. They spoke of respect for the land, for the animals, and for each other. The cowboy listened intently, realizing how little he had known about the lives of people beyond the range he traveled. He felt a deep respect growing for them, for their strength, their wisdom, and their courage. After a while, the younger sister laughed softly, breaking the serious tone of their conversation. "You have been traveling alone for so long," she said. "It must be strange for you to sit with people who care about you, even if you've just met them." The cowboy nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "It is strange," he admitted, "but it is good. It feels good." The older sister smiled. "Sometimes even the strongest people need a little help. There is no shame in that." He realized she was right. For so long, he had prided himself on self-reliance, on never asking for help, on facing the world alone. But tonight and this morning, he had learned that strength could come from accepting care, from letting others share the burden. He felt a quiet gratitude that filled him more than any fire could. As the day went on, the sisters prepared a warm meal, inviting him to help in small ways. He chopped some vegetables and stirred the pot, enjoying the simple tasks and the quiet companionship. The three of them laughed at small accidents, the pot simmering too quickly, a piece of bread falling on the floor, but there was no tension, only shared humanity. After the meal, they moved to sit by the fire again. The sisters offered him a warm shawl to wrap around his shoulders, and he accepted gratefully. The younger sister leaned closer and said, teasing gently, "Last night you were quiet, but tonight you can talk more. We don't bite." The cowboy laughed softly, feeling at ease in their presence. He realized that in all his years traveling alone, he had never felt this kind of comfort, this sense of being accepted without question. It was a rare and precious gift, and he did not take it lightly. As the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the snow outside, the sisters talked about the night ahead. "It will be very cold again," the older sister said. "We should make sure you are warm. You can stay here tonight by the fire and sleep between us again if you like." The cowboy blinked, surprised by her words, but he saw the warmth in her eyes and the care behind them. He realized it was not just a gesture of kindness, it was an invitation of trust, a way to show that he was not alone. He nodded, feeling a quiet gratitude swell inside him. As the day turned to evening, the cowboy watched the snow falling gently outside the window. He thought about the journey ahead, the challenges yet to come, and the lessons he had learned in the past 24 hours. He had found safety, warmth, and friendship in the most unexpected place, and he knew that this encounter would stay with him forever. The sisters moved around, preparing for the night. They fluffed the blankets, arranged the pillows, and made sure the fire would last. The cowboy felt a deep sense of comfort, knowing that he would not face the cold alone. For the first time in years, he felt truly cared for, and it changed something inside him. That night, as the fire flickered and the shadows danced across the walls, the cowboy understood that life sometimes brought people together in unexpected ways. The cold desert, the harsh winds, and the lonely roads had led him to these sisters, and in their warmth, he had found not only shelter but a lesson in kindness, courage, and trust. He lay down, feeling the warmth of the blankets and the fire, and he knew that this night, and the bond he had formed with the sisters, would remain with him forever. In the quiet of the small home, with the snow falling softly outside, he drifted into a peaceful sleep, surrounded by care and humanity. The next morning, the cowboy woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the small windows. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the room was quiet except for the occasional crackle. Outside, the snow continued to fall gently, covering the world in white, but inside, warmth and comfort filled the space. He stretched and slowly got up, feeling stronger than he had the day before. His body still ached from the long journey, but the warmth of the blankets and the food he had eaten gave him a renewed sense of energy. The sisters were already awake, moving about the small home with the calm efficiency he had grown to admire. The older sister was tending to the fire, ensuring it burned steadily, while the younger one was preparing a small breakfast of bread, honey, and porridge. The aroma of food and wood smoke mingled, creating a comforting atmosphere that reminded him of the rare feeling of being truly cared for. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft from sleep. "Good morning," replied the older sister, glancing up with a gentle smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, very well," the cowboy said. "Thanks to both of you, I haven't felt this rested in a long time." The younger sister laughed softly. "You looked peaceful. It's nice to see someone finally relaxing for a change." The cowboy smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. It was strange to him. He had spent so many years on the road, moving from place to place, always alone. People were usually wary of him or indifferent. But here, with these two women, he felt something he had never expected, comfort, trust, and a quiet sense of belonging. As they sat together to eat, the sisters encouraged him to share stories of his life on the range. The cowboy hesitated at first. He had never been one to talk much about himself, preferring to keep his thoughts and experiences private. But something in the sisters' eyes, their genuine curiosity and kind smiles, made him feel safe enough to open up. He began by speaking about his travels, the long days spent riding through open plains and the nights under the stars. He spoke of the challenges of tending cattle, the harsh weather, and the loneliness that often came with life on the road. The sisters listened intently, asking questions here and there, their eyes shining with interest. "You have been very brave," said the older sister. "It takes courage to face the world alone every day." The cowboy nodded, feeling a sense of humility. "It is not always bravery," he said quietly. "Sometimes it is just necessary. You do what you must to survive." The younger sister tilted her head, curious. "And what about happiness? Do you ever find time for that?" He thought about it, realizing that happiness had been a rare visitor in his life. "Occasionally," he admitted, "moments of peace, moments of kindness like this, but they are rare." The sisters exchanged a glance, understanding without speaking. They had seen people like him before, strong, independent, yet carrying burdens that made life harder than it needed to be. And they knew that sometimes, the smallest gestures of care could make the biggest difference. After breakfast, they decided to move closer to the fire to warm themselves further. The cowboy wrapped a shawl around his shoulders, grateful for the simple comfort. The younger sister leaned back, smiling. "You know, it's strange," she said, "meeting someone like you, someone who has seen so much of the world yet can still appreciate small acts of kindness." He looked at her, surprised by her words. "I suppose I've never really thought about it that way. I'm used to fending for myself. But even the strongest people need help sometimes," said the older sister gently. "There is no shame in accepting care." The cowboy nodded, feeling the truth of her words. For so long, he had believed that strength meant never relying on anyone, never showing vulnerability. But here, with these sisters, he was learning that strength could also mean trust, humility, and openness. As the day wore on, the conversation turned to the sisters' lives. They spoke of their childhood in the village, the lessons taught by their parents, and the traditions they cherished. They shared stories of working the land, tending animals, and learning from the natural world around them. The cowboy listened, fascinated by their resilience and the harmony they maintained with their surroundings. "You have a remarkable life," he said finally. "It is very different from mine, but I can see the strength it takes to live as you do." The younger sister smiled. "We all have challenges," she said. "Yours are different but no less real." The cowboy felt a deep respect for them growing inside him. He realized that courage came in many forms, not just facing storms and wild animals, but also in living a life of purpose, caring for others and preserving traditions. The sisters embodied this kind of quiet, steady courage, and he admired them for it. After a while, the conversation turned lighter. They laughed together at small anecdotes, the time a chicken had escaped and caused chaos in the yard, or when the older sister had slipped on a frozen patch of ground. The cowboy found himself laughing too, a sound he realized had been absent from his life for far too long. It was easy here, easy to smile and enjoy the moment without fear or suspicion. The younger sister suddenly leaned closer, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You know," she said softly, "last night you were very quiet. I think you were trying not to shiver too much." The cowboy chuckled, feeling a warmth spread across his face. "I suppose I was. I didn't want to bother anyone with my shivering." "You didn't bother us," she said gently. "In fact, it was a little funny in a kind way, but mostly it was brave." The cowboy shook his head, smiling. "I've never had people treat me like this before. It's strange but good." The older sister added, "It is good. And it is well deserved. You have been through a lot, and sometimes the world can be harsh, but there is also kindness if you are willing to accept it." He nodded slowly, understanding the depth of her words. He had spent so much of his life fending for himself, moving from place to place, trusting no one. But here, he was learning that it was possible to find warmth, friendship, and understanding even in the harshest conditions. As the afternoon sun moved across the sky, the sisters suggested going outside for a while, to check on the small animals they kept near the home. The cowboy agreed, feeling the need to stretch his legs and see the snowy world from a different perspective. Bundled in layers and scarves, the three of them stepped outside. The snow crunched under their boots, and the cold air stung their faces, but the warmth from the fire lingered in their bodies. They walked slowly, the sisters pointing out details in the landscape, the tracks of a fox, the way the wind had shaped the snow, the small plants that still survived despite the cold. The cowboy listened and watched, noticing things he had never paid attention to in his life on the range. There was beauty even in hardship, and he realized that the world was full of lessons if one took the time to observe. After checking on the animals, they returned inside, where the sisters prepared a warm dinner. The cowboy helped in small ways, stirring pots and arranging plates, enjoying the sense of shared purpose. They ate together, talking and laughing, and he felt a growing connection, not just to the sisters, but to a world that seemed richer and fuller than the one he had known alone. As night approached, the younger sister said softly, "Tonight will be colder than yesterday. We want to make sure you stay warm. You can sleep between us again if you'd like." The cowboy looked at her, touched by the care in her voice. He nodded quietly, grateful beyond words. It was more than just warmth. It was trust, a gift he had rarely experienced. He knew that this simple act of kindness would stay with him for the rest of his life. As they prepared for bed, the cowboy thought about the journey that had brought him here. He had faced storms, long days, and lonely nights, but he had never imagined that a simple act of human kindness could have such a profound impact. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, a feeling that he was not alone in the world, and that connection was possible even with strangers. That night, as the fire burned low and the snow fell silently outside, the cowboy lay between the sisters, feeling their warmth and care. He reflected on the stories they had shared, the laughter, and the lessons learned. He realized that bravery was not just about facing danger, but also about trusting, sharing, and accepting kindness. In the quiet of the small home, surrounded by warmth and compassion, the cowboy drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, carrying with him the memory of a rare and beautiful connection that would remain in his heart forever. The next morning, the cowboy woke to the cold light of dawn, but inside the small home, warmth lingered from the fire that had burned late into the night. The snow outside was thick, covering the ground in a soft white blanket, and the wind blew with a force that made the trees sway gently. Today, however, there was a feeling in the air that something was different. It wasn't danger exactly, but a sense of anticipation, a quiet tension that made the cowboy pay attention to every sound, every movement. As he stretched and sat up, the sisters were already awake, preparing for the day ahead. The older sister checked the fire carefully, ensuring the logs would last through the day, while the younger one gathered fresh water from the basin near the window. There was a calm efficiency in their movements, a rhythm he had grown to admire. It was clear that these sisters had lived with hardship, but they had faced it with courage and skill. "Good morning," the cowboy said quietly. "Good morning," the older sister replied, her eyes warm. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in years," he said honestly, smiling. "Thanks to both of you." The younger sister laughed softly. "You look stronger today. The fire and food have done their magic." As they ate breakfast, the conversation was light at first. They discussed small things, the cold, the snow, and the animals they tended on the property. But soon the older sister's eyes grew serious. "The storm isn't done yet," she said. "The wind is strong and the snow is deeper in the north. If you go out there now, it will be difficult." The cowboy nodded, understanding the warning. He had faced harsh conditions before, but he knew enough to respect nature. "I can wait," he said. "I'm not in a hurry. I'm glad to be here." The sisters smiled at him. "Good," the younger one said, "because today we might need your help." He raised an eyebrow. "My help?" "Yes," the older sister said, nodding. "Something happened to one of the horses last night. We need to guide it back to the stable before it gets too cold. The snow is making it difficult, and we could use another pair of hands." The cowboy felt a rush of energy. He had been traveling for so long, surviving on his own, that it had been rare for someone to ask for his help in a way that mattered. He stood, ready to assist. "I'm ready," he said. Bundled in warm clothing and scarves, the three of them stepped outside. The cold hit them immediately, sharp and biting, but the cowboy felt alive. The wind whipped through the snow, and the landscape seemed endless, white and quiet, except for the sound of crunching boots and the occasional cry of a distant bird. They moved carefully across the snow, searching for the horse. The sisters pointed out tracks that the cowboy hadn't noticed, the paw prints of a small animal, the faint marks where the horse had wandered. It was a delicate task, requiring attention and patience. The cowboy followed their lead, amazed at their knowledge of the land, the animals, and the signs hidden in the snow. After some time, they spotted the horse in the distance, trapped in a small drift of snow. It struggled to move, its breath visible in the cold air. The cowboy's heart tightened. He had faced danger with animals before, but seeing the horse so vulnerable made him feel a responsibility he could not ignore. "Careful," the older sister warned. "It's frightened. Move slowly." The cowboy nodded, approaching the horse with measured steps. He spoke softly, using a calm tone to soothe it. The horse trembled but gradually relaxed under his gentle voice and steady hands. The sisters moved close, helping to guide it and clear the snow around its hooves. It was difficult work, exhausting both physically and mentally, but the cowboy found a strange satisfaction in it. He was no longer alone in his struggle. The sisters were beside him, working as a team. They communicated without words at times, each action coordinated with care and understanding. He realized that courage was not just facing danger alone, it was facing it together, relying on each other, and trusting in the skills and hearts of others. After a tense and careful effort, they managed to guide the horse safely back to the stable. The animal nuzzled the sisters gratefully, and the cowboy let out a long breath, feeling the tension leave his body. He looked at the sisters, their cheeks flushed from the cold and exertion, their eyes shining with satisfaction and pride. "You did well," the younger sister said, smiling. "You were brave and you handled it perfectly." The cowboy shook his head slightly. "It was easier because you were both here. Alone, I'm not sure I could have done it." The older sister nodded. "That's why we work together. Bravery is more than strength. It's trust, patience, and the willingness to act when it matters." The cowboy reflected on her words, realizing the truth in them. He had always measured bravery by facing storms, traveling alone, and surviving the harshest conditions. But today, he had learned that courage also meant trusting others, stepping forward when needed, and sharing the responsibility. After returning the horse to the stable, they went back inside the warmth of the home. The cowboy washed his hands and face, feeling the warmth seep back into his body. The sisters prepared a warm meal, and as they ate, the conversation turned lighter. They laughed at small mishaps from earlier in the day, the horse slipping slightly in the snow, or the awkward way the cowboy had tripped over a hidden drift. The cowboy found himself smiling freely, a sound and expression he realized he had not shared in a long time. The day's challenges had tested his endurance and patience, but they had also strengthened a bond that had begun to form between him and the sisters. He felt a sense of belonging, a rare and precious feeling he had not experienced for years. As the afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows over the snow-covered landscape, the sisters spoke about their plans for the evening. "Tonight, it will be even colder," the older sister said. "We will need to make sure the fire is strong and that everyone stays warm." The cowboy nodded, already thinking about how grateful he was for their care. "I understand," he said. "I will help however I can." The younger sister smiled, a teasing light in her eyes. "You don't have to do much. Just stay between us again tonight and keep warm." The cowboy chuckled softly, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Their words, though simple, carried a deep sense of care and trust. He realized that this bond, formed in the harsh cold and tested by challenges, was something rare and meaningful. As evening fell, the sisters prepared the home for the night. The fire was carefully arranged to last until morning, and extra blankets were laid out. The cowboy felt a sense of peace as he watched their careful preparations. It was clear that they had faced challenges before and knew how to handle the harsh winter. Their courage and skill were impressive, but it was their kindness that touched him most. That night, as the three of them settled in by the fire, the cowboy felt a sense of gratitude he could not fully express. The sisters' trust and care had taught him a lesson about courage, resilience, and human connection. He realized that bravery was not just about facing the elements or surviving alone. It was also about stepping forward to help, trusting others, and accepting kindness when offered. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light across the room. Outside, the wind howled, but inside there was safety, warmth, and friendship. The cowboy lay down between the sisters, feeling their presence and care. He reflected on the day's events, the snow, the frightened horse, and the teamwork that had brought them through it. He understood that life was not just about survival, but also about the bonds we form, the trust we give and receive, and the lessons learned through shared experience. As sleep approached, he felt a quiet peace. The challenges of the day had tested him, but they had also strengthened him in ways he had not anticipated. The sisters' warmth, both physical and emotional, wrapped around him like a protective shield, reminding him that even in the coldest and harshest conditions, compassion and courage could prevail. He drifted into a deep, restful sleep, carrying with him the memory of the day's trials and triumphs. He knew that the lessons learned today, about bravery, trust, and the power of human connection, would remain with him forever, guiding him through future challenges and reminding him of the rare and beautiful bond he had formed with the two sisters. The next morning, the cowboy woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the small windows. The fire had burned low overnight, leaving warm embers that glowed softly in the room. Outside, the snow still covered the ground in a thick, pure blanket, and the wind whispered through the trees. It was quiet, almost peaceful, but the cowboy felt a small weight in his chest. Today, he would leave. He sat up slowly, feeling the comfort of the blankets around him, and looked at the two sisters. They were already awake, moving quietly around the small home, preparing for the day. The older sister arranged firewood, while the younger one checked the small animals near the window. Even in these simple tasks, there was a strength and grace that reminded the cowboy how extraordinary they were. "Good morning," he said quietly, his voice catching slightly. "Good morning," replied the older sister, glancing at him with a warm smile. "Did you sleep well?" "I did," he said honestly. "Thanks to you both, I feel rested, better than I have in a long time." The younger sister smiled softly. "We are glad. You looked peaceful, and that is a rare sight for someone who has been traveling as much as you have." The cowboy felt a lump in his throat. He had been on the road for so long, facing storms, cold nights, and loneliness. He had grown used to relying only on himself, to surviving without anyone else's help. Yet here, with these sisters, he had found something he did not know he had been missing, a sense of home, even if only for a few days. They sat down together for breakfast, the warmth from the fire filling the small home. The sisters had prepared simple food, bread, cheese, and a pot of warm porridge, but the cowboy savored it as if it were a feast. They ate quietly for a while, each lost in their thoughts. He thought about the past days, the journey through snow, the fire-lit nights, the stories, the laughter, and the small acts of care that had meant so much. After breakfast, the sisters suggested he prepare for the journey ahead. They helped him bundle his belongings, making sure he had enough supplies and warm clothing for the cold ride. The cowboy felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness. He was eager to continue his journey, but leaving these two remarkable women behind was harder than he expected. "You've been a true friend," he said quietly, handing a small bundle of supplies. I don't know how to thank you enough." The older sister smiled gently. "You don't need to thank us. We only did what anyone would do. It's what kindness is." The younger sister added, "But we hope this will help you on your journey. And remember, bravery is not only about surviving storms and snow. It's also about trusting others, sharing burdens, and accepting care when it is offered." The cowboy nodded, feeling the depth of her words. They had become more than strangers to him. They had shown him warmth, care, and lessons in courage that would remain with him forever. Outside, the snow glistened in the early sunlight, sparkling like tiny diamonds on the frozen ground. The horse he had helped rescue a few days ago waited patiently nearby, its breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. The cowboy approached the animal, brushing the snow from its back and speaking softly to calm it. The horse nuzzled his shoulder in a quiet gesture of trust and companionship. The sisters stood nearby, watching with pride. "You've become part of this little world for a short time," the older sister said, "and it has been good to see how you care for the animals, the land, and each other." The cowboy smiled, feeling a sense of connection he had never experienced before. "You've taught me more in a few days than I've learned in years on the road," he admitted. The younger sister laughed softly. "That is what happens when people show kindness. Lessons are learned and hearts are touched." As the time to leave drew near, the sisters prepared a small token for him, a scarf handmade from warm, soft wool. "To keep you warm on your journey," the older sister said, handing it to him. "And to remind you that kindness exists in the world, even in the coldest places." The cowboy took the scarf, feeling the texture and warmth, and nodded silently. He could feel tears welling in his eyes, but he blinked them away, not wanting to show weakness. Yet inside, he felt something shift. He had always been a traveler, a loner, someone who survived without help. But now he carried with him a sense of belonging, even if fleeting, and a memory of care that would last a lifetime. He mounted his horse, feeling the familiar weight of the saddle, the reins firm in his hands. The sisters stood close, waving as he prepared to ride away. The younger sister's voice called softly, "Remember, bravery is not only facing the storm alone, it is also about letting others stand beside you." The cowboy nodded, deeply moved. "I will remember," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. As he rode away, the crunch of snow beneath the horse's hooves echoed in the still morning air. The small home grew smaller in the distance, but its warmth, and the bond he had formed with the sisters, remained vivid in his mind. He glanced back once more, seeing the two women standing together, waving, their expressions filled with kindness, courage, and pride. The journey ahead would be difficult, the snow and cold still formidable, but the cowboy felt a new strength inside him. He had learned lessons beyond survival, lessons of trust, care, and the power of human connection. The warmth of the sisters' home, their guidance, and their friendship had changed him in ways he could not yet fully understand, but he knew the impact would last forever. Hours passed as he rode through the snowy landscape, the sun climbing higher and warming the crisp air slightly. The world was still harsh and cold, but he no longer felt alone. Every step of the horse, every gust of wind, every sight of the snow-covered plains reminded him of the bond he had formed. He realized that courage, kindness and trust were treasures more valuable than any survival skill he had learned on the road. He thought about the sisters' stories, their laughter, and the quiet wisdom they had shared. They had shown him that life was not only about endurance, but also about connection, understanding, and empathy. Even in the harshest conditions, people could be kind, strong, and brave together. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the snowy plains, the cowboy found a small hill to rest. He dismounted the horse, patting it gently, and sat to watch the colors change in the sky. The world looked endless and beautiful, and he felt a deep gratitude for the brief but powerful experience he had shared with the sisters. He wrapped the scarf around his neck, feeling its warmth, and thought of the lessons he had learned. He realized that kindness was not just a gift. It was a force that could change people, strengthen hearts, and create bonds that transcended time and distance. The sisters' care had reminded him of this, and he promised himself to carry it forward, wherever life would take him. As night fell, the cowboy continued his journey, but his steps felt lighter, his heart warmer, and his mind clearer. He knew he would face challenges, storms, and lonely nights ahead, but the memory of the sisters, their courage, and their kindness would be with him always. The cold winds of the desert no longer felt as harsh. The snow, while still relentless, seemed less intimidating. The cowboy realized that the true warmth came not from fire or blankets, but from human connection, the trust, care, and love shared between people willing to stand beside one another. In the quiet of the night, under the vast, star-filled sky, the cowboy rode on, carrying a new understanding of life. He had learned that bravery was not only in survival but in the willingness to accept help, to trust, and to form bonds. And in the heart of a snowy desert, he had discovered a rare and precious gift, the warmth of human kindness, and the memory of two extraordinary sisters who had changed his life forever. By the time he disappeared into the horizon, the sisters' home was behind him, small and humble, yet filled with the impact of the moments shared. And though the cowboy was alone once more on his journey, he was no longer lonely. He carried with him the lessons, the warmth, and the love that could only be given by those who cared without expectation. He rode through the night with the scarf wrapped around him, a small reminder that even in the coldest, harshest places, kindness, courage, and trust could be found. And as the stars shone brightly overhead, he knew that no matter where life led, the memory of the Apache sisters, their laughter, care, and courage, would remain with him forever.